There is a headline floating around this week that you probably missed. It says, "The Prime Minister meets with big city mayors." It sounds boring. It sounds like a bureaucratic discussion about zoning bylaws, potholes, or maybe federal funding for a new community center. It sounds like noise. And in a world where every notification on your phone is screaming for attention, mayor's meeting is the kind of news designed to be ignored. Most people scrolled past this headline, PM meets mayors. It sounds like a bureaucratic discussion about parking tickets or zoning bylaws. But if you actually read the transcript, this wasn't a town hall. It reads like a war room briefing. Because tucked away in the middle of that transcript, at minute 4 to be exact, the Prime Minister drops a number that should make you sit up straight. He didn't just talk about housing, he talked about force. 1,000 new agents for the RCMP, 1,000 new border security guards through CBSA, 2,000 new uniformed personnel deployed to the interior and the perimeter simultaneously. And then he used a phrase we haven't heard from a Canadian leader in a very, very long time. He explicitly said the goal is, quote, protecting our frontiers. Frontiers, not borders, frontiers. That word carries weight. It implies a boundary that is being tested. If you think this meeting was about municipal infrastructure, you're looking at the wrong map. This wasn't a meeting about cities. This was a meeting about turning the country into a fortress. And today, we're going to look at the numbers. The $51 billion fund, the bail reform, and the border surge, to explain why Canada is suddenly hardening its shell. Let's start with that number again. 2,000 agents. To put that in perspective, in a normal budget cycle, getting funding for 50 or 100 new officers is considered a win. Announcing 1,000 RCMP and 1,000 CBSA guards in a single breath isn't normal. It's a surge. It is a mobilization. Why now? Look at the language in the transcript. The Prime Minister links this directly to transnational crime and protecting our frontiers. For the last decade, the conversation in Ottawa was about openness. It was about flow. The border was treated as a bridge, a handshake. But listen to the shift in tone. The border is now being framed as a filter, a hard filter. 1,000 new border guards don't just stamp passports faster. They screen, they detain, they deny. They are the physical manifestation of the word no. This is the first pillar of the fortress strategy, hardening the perimeter. You don't deploy that kind of manpower unless you are expecting pressure, unless you are preparing for a world where the flow of people and goods isn't friendly anymore. We know the geopolitical context. We know the pressure coming from the south and the instability across the Atlantic. But here's the thing. And this is the part most analysts miss. You can't just harden the border if the inside is soft. A fortress with a locked gate but a crumbling foundation is useless. And that brings us to the part of the meeting that actually surprised me, the cities. When the mayors sat down, the conversation turned immediately to safety. Now, usually, federal politicians like to talk about root causes. They talk about sociology. They talk about the long term. But look at what happened here. The mayor of a major Canadian city looked the PM in the eye and welcomed the new bail reform bill. He said specifically that once this passes, the federal government will be making it harder for repeat and violent offenders to get bail. Making it harder. That is the key phrase. This is where we need to be honest about the reality on the ground. Ask anyone living in downtown Toronto or Vancouver right now. The vibe has shifted. It's not just about the stats. It's the feeling that the basic social contract is fraying. You can't build a grand strategy for the world stage when your own citizens are afraid to walk to the subway. The government knows this. But let's go deeper. Why does the federal government care about street crime now? Because capital is a coward. Money hates chaos. You cannot project power abroad if you have instability at home. The era of catch and release is ending not just because of public outcry, but because the state needs economic stability. When a city center becomes unsafe, businesses close, commercial real estate collapses, the tax base erodes, and suddenly the national economy has a hole in it. Internal order is an economic asset. If your cities are chaotic, investment leaves. If investment leaves, your leverage on the world stage evaporates. You become a nation asking for help rather than a nation offering partnerships. So when you see bail reform and 1,000 RCMP agents in the same transcript, don't view them as separate policies. They are the same policy. One locks the border, the other locks the street. It's a containment strategy. It is about removing the variables that cause internal drag on the nation. But security is expensive, and it's not just about police. It's about making sure the country doesn't collapse under economic pressure from the outside. That's where the money comes in, and the number is massive. Minute 1, 36. The Prime Minister puts a number on the table, $51 billion. He calls it the Building Community Strong Fund. Now, in political speak, that sounds fuzzy. It sounds like money for parks, gazebos, and libraries. But look closer at what he actually said. He lists what it's for: community infrastructure, transit, health infrastructure, taking control of our destiny. That last part, taking control of our destiny, that is not infrastructure talk. That is sovereignty talk. Here is what $51 billion actually buys you. It buys you shock absorption. Let's break down the East-West comment from the mayor. He explicitly talked about needing to double exports east to west and connecting every factory and every mine to rail. Why does that matter? For the last 35 years, since the original trade deals, Canada's economy has been designed to flow north-south. We dig it up or make it here, and we ship it south. Our highways point south. Our pipelines point south. Our rail capacity is optimized for the U.S. market. But what happens when that border gets thick? What happens when tariffs or Buy American policies or simple geopolitical friction makes that border harder to cross? If you can't sell south, you die. Unless you can move east and west. That is what the economic moat is about. It's about building the rail lines, the bridges, and the ports to get Canadian goods to Europe and Asia without asking for American permission. The $51 billion is the down payment on that independence. And it includes housing. The transcript confirms a ramp up from 7,500 homes to a capacity of 50,000 homes using Canada lands. Again, don't look at this as welfare. Look at it as stability. If you have a housing crisis, you have a labor crisis. If workers can't afford to live in your cities, they can't build the factories or staff the ports. The government is dumping $51 billion into the foundation of the house because they know a storm is coming. They are trying to institutionalize these builds. That's the word the PM used. So that no matter what happens globally, Canadians have a road. It's defensive spending. It is the infrastructure of survival. So let's step back and look at the map. We have the perimeter, 1,000 new guards. We have the interior, stricter bail reform. We have the foundation, $51 billion in defensive infrastructure. Connect these dots. This is not a list of unrelated announcements. This is a doctrine. The Prime Minister said it himself, diversifying our partnerships abroad while building communities strong. This is the pivot. And to understand how big this is, we have to look at history. In 1945, Canada built a massive state to transition from war to peace. In 2001, we overhauled our security to deal with terror. In 2026, we are overhauling the state again, this time to deal with volatility. For the last 10 years, we operated on the assumption that being open was enough, that being nice was a foreign policy. That era is dead. February 2026 is showing us that in a world of wolves, soft power requires a hard shell. You cannot diversify your trade away from a superpower if your own economy is fragile. You cannot demand respect on the G7 stage if you can't control your own streets. This meeting with the mayors was the moment the federal government admitted that foreign policy starts at the sewer line and the police station. They are tightening the bolts. They are closing the gaps. They are preparing the country for a period of time where we might have to rely on ourselves a lot more than we're used to. The post-national dream is over. The nation-building reality has begun. We often look for big, dramatic speeches to tell us when history has changed. We wait for a declaration of war or a treaty signing. But sometimes the shift happens in a dull conference room with a group of mayors buried in a transcript about infrastructure. The numbers tell the story. 1,000 agents, $51 billion, bail reform. These are not the actions of a government that is relaxed. These are the actions of a government that is bracing for impact. We are building a fortress, not because we want to hide from the world, but because the world has changed. And for the first time in a long time, Ottawa isn't just watching it happen, we are locking the gate. If you want to understand the new reality, subscribe now.